In the quiet, lily-escented air of the Huntington funeral home, an old man named Robert stood over the mahogany casket of his only son. His son, Michael, was just 37 years old. The year was 2024. The date was March 18th. Robert was 62. He had always imagined his son would one day stand over his own grave, not the other way around. The room was thick with murmured sympathies and the rustle of dark clothing. Michael's wife, Charlotte, sat beside Robert. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but Robert noticed her tears seemed perfectly timed, more like a performance than a genuine breakdown. His mind kept drifting back to the impossible phone call from 3 days before. Michael had suffered a massive heart attack at his office. The doctors called it a tragic fluke, the kind of thing that can happen to even a healthy man under the strain of running a $12 million business empire. As the pastor spoke of heavenly peace, a deep unease settled in Robert's gut. It was more than the natural wrongness of burying a child. Something about this whole scene felt staged. He watched the guests file by. Charlotte accepted condolences with a graceful, practiced sorrow. And then there was David Miller, Michael's business partner. David stood at the back of the room, his eyes rarely leaving Charlotte. His gaze followed her every move as if they were connected by a hidden wire. David had always been the smooth one, the financial brain behind their company, Sterling Solutions. He wore expensive suits and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Robert had never fully trusted him. When the time came for the final family viewing, Robert approached the casket on unsteady legs. His son looked peaceful, dressed in the navy suit he'd worn on his wedding day. Robert leaned down and whispered a private, aching goodbye. As he stepped back, Charlotte took her turn, placing a single white rose on Michael's chest. It was then that David appeared silently at Robert's side. He leaned in so close Robert could smell his sharp cologne. His voice was a low, venomous whisper, meant only for Robert's ears. "Don't worry, old man," David breathed, the words dripping with a cruel satisfaction. "I'll spend his millions better than he ever did." The words struck Robert like a physical blow. He turned, stunned, to look at David, but the man's face was a mask of bland indifference. Had grief finally stolen Robert's sanity? But then, the impossible happened. From inside the polished mahogany casket came a sound. It was soft, barely a breath of noise, but Robert heard it perfectly. It was a chuckle, a soft, knowing, unmistakable chuckle that belonged to his son, Michael. Robert's hand flew to the casket's edge, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw David's eyes widen in shock. The color drained from his face, and he took a hurried step backward. No one else in the room seemed to notice a thing. The solemn funeral march continued unabated. Robert stared down at his son's motionless face. There was no sign of life, no flutter of a breath. Yet he knew what he had heard. It was the same secretive laugh Michael had as a boy when he knew something you didn't. The same laugh he'd made when he'd outmaneuvered Robert in a game of chess. The rest of the service was a blur. Robert moved through the motions of receiving condolences, but his mind was churning. David's threat echoed in his skull. The terrible implication of that laugh echoed deeper. As the room emptied, Robert found himself alone with the casket for one last moment. He leaned close again, whispering his son's name. There was no response, but as he straightened up, his eyes caught a new, chilling detail. Michael's wedding band, the simple gold ring he had worn every day for 9 years, was gone from his finger. A cold dread seeped into Robert's bones. The whispered threat, the impossible laugh, the missing ring. These were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture they were forming was one of a devastating hidden truth. His son's death was not what it seemed. And as Robert drove home to his empty, silent house, he knew one thing for certain. He would find out what really happened, no matter where the truth led. Outside his window, a car engine started in the night and drove away. Robert did not yet know he was being watched. He only knew that the game, whatever it was, had just begun, and he was now an unwilling player. Sleep would not come to Robert that night. The memory of that soft chuckle from the casket played on a loop in his mind. By dawn, he was drinking coffee with shaking hands, resolved to find answers. His first stop was St. Clair's Hospital, where his son had been pronounced dead. The attending physician, Dr. Amanda Reed, was sympathetic but professional. She confirmed the official story of a sudden cardiac arrest. But when Robert pressed her, asking if anything seemed unusual, she hesitated. The only anomaly was the rigor mortis, Dr. Reed admitted, lowering her voice. It set in remarkably fast. That can happen with extreme exertion before death, certain toxins, or if the time of death was earlier than reported. She quickly dismissed the latter idea, but the seed was planted in Robert's mind. An incorrect time of death. That would mean someone had lied. His next stop was the downtown high-rise that housed Sterling Solutions. The office felt hollow without Michael's booming presence. The receptionist, Emily, was nervous when Robert asked to see his son's office. "Mr. Miller said it's off limits," she whispered, glancing toward the corner office. "Legal reasons. But, sir, he's been acting strange. He was here working until midnight last night, the day of the funeral." Robert's suspicion deepened. "What about the day Michael died? What time did David leave?" Emily frowned. "He left when I did, around 5. He said he had somewhere to be, but he told the police he found Mr. Sterling at 6:30. The discrepancy was glaring. An hour and a half unaccounted for. Before he could ask more, the elevator doors opened, and David Miller himself walked out, looking impeccably dressed but weary. "Robert," David said, his surprise looking forced. "What brings you here?" "I'd like to collect Michael's things." "Of course," David replied smoothly. "Once the estate is settled, the lawyers want everything preserved for now." His eyes would not meet Robert's. "Emily mentioned you've been working late every night," Robert pressed. "That's quite the dedication." A flash of irritation crossed David's face. "Someone has to keep the company running. Now, if you'll excuse me." He retreated into Michael's office, closing the door firmly. Through the gap, Robert saw an open safe and stacks of files on the desk. Robert left, his mind racing. David was lying about the timeline and feverishly going through Michael's files. This was not grief. This was a man covering his tracks. The final stop of the day was the funeral home. Director Harold Huntington was apologetic, but confirmed Robert's growing fear. "There was no wedding ring noted in our records," he said. "And, if I may be frank, the body was delivered to us unusually cold, as if it had been in refrigeration." The pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. A body too cold. Accelerated rigor mortis. A missing wedding ring. A business partner lying about his whereabouts. This was not a natural death. Michael had died much earlier than reported, and his body had been kept cold to disguise the fact. That night, Charlotte called, her voice strained. "Robert, we need to talk. Can you come over? There's something important about Michael. About why he was acting so strange lately." Robert drove to their grand colonial home on Elm Street, his heart a drum in his chest. Charlotte, wrapped in a black silk robe, led him to a dimly lit living room. She poured wine with unsteady hands and finally confessed the first layer of the truth. "Michael knew," she said, tears finally seeming real. "He knew about David and me. The affair started 6 months ago. I was lonely. Michael was always working." She handed Robert a manila envelope filled with surveillance photos Michael had taken. Photos of her and David, but also photos of Michael himself meeting with an old friend, Dr. Alan Carter, from St. Clair's Hospital. "I thought he was having an affair too," Charlotte whispered. "So I hired someone to follow him. That's when I found the storage unit." "What was in it?" Robert asked, his mouth dry. "Documents, cash, fake IDs." Charlotte's eyes were wide with a fear that looked genuine. "Robert, I don't think Michael is dead. I think he faked it. Dr. Carter was his college roommate. If anyone could help him stage a death—" The world tilted around Robert. A staged death. A trap. Michael had discovered